This little town we're leaving from is known as Deep River, Connecticut. Today it's a pretty sleepy little place, but it wasn't always so. Back in the 1800s, it was a major transportation hub, what with the dock here and the railroad. And during the 1800s, there was steamboat traffic on the Connecticut River. If you wanted to get from places in Connecticut down to New York, you could take a horse and buggy, which would be a long, bumpy ride, or a much better alternative, if you wanted to get from Hartford to New York, was to hop on a steamboat. They were really quite luxurious. It was an overnight trip. You'd leave Hartford at 4 in the afternoon, and you'd arrive in New York City the following morning. And they said these steamboats were quite luxurious. They had very fine restaurants. They had fancy staterooms. Some of them had bridal suites. They offered live entertainment. Some of them had casino gambling even. And all that for the price of $5. Wow. Of course, back in those days, $5 was about a month's worth of pay, so. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, those were nice trips. A very fancy way to travel. So we had a lot of steamboat traffic during the steamboat era from 1821 till about 1931, a little over 100 years. After that, the railroads came along a line. You guys arrived by railroad today. That's the Connecticut Valley Railroad. That line was established in 1871. And later, of course, automobiles came online, and that shortened the trip from Hartford to New York. It was no longer required an overnight trip. It was a 6 to 8 hour trip by automobile. Folks, look up to the right, you'll see a couple swans. We hope to see a lot of birds today. You see that guy on top of the piling? That's a cormorant. They are very good at diving deep, catching fish. You've got some ducks along here, looks like. Some more cormorants. Now the interesting thing about a cormorant, unlike a duck, maybe you've heard the expression, ducks never get wet. It's because ducks have a lot of oil in their feathers. Cormorants have the opposite situation. They have very little oil. So in fact they tend to get waterlogged. And that enables them to dive very deep. As they say, they do get waterlogged, and oftentimes after they get back out of their deep dives, they stand on the shore or on these pilings, and they stretch their arms out, kind of like in a Karate Kid. And what they're doing is they're drying out their wings. We saw that pair of swans. Typically you do see swans in pairs. I guess they're known as the lovebirds, but if you come across them, don't disturb them because they are very territorial. They can be quite mean if you go up to them. So folks, right now we're heading south. We're in what we know is known as the original Steamboat Channel. This island to our left is known as Eustatia Island. At one point it was known as 12 Mile Island. And the reason for that being that the early colonists estimated it to be 12 miles from the mouth of the river. They actually weren't far off. It was about 9 or 10 miles, but they didn't have GPS back then, so what do they know, right? So back in the 1700s, they used to extend fishing nets off of this island and catch various fish, salmon, shad, both of which were very plentiful back in the 1700s. They catch other small fish, black eels, and it was a pretty productive fishing spot. Later in the 1800s and early 1900s, this was a big hayfield. They used to graze cattle there in the summer. It was used for grazing cattle. And for a while, in the late 1900s, they grew Christmas trees on this island, and the locals referred to the island as Christmas Tree Island. But they don't do that anymore, and since they've abandoned that, the island has kind of gone back to nature, and it's a great preserve for not just birds, but also wildlife. We've actually spotted deer out there on occasion, so maybe we'll see them today. Folks, now another industry that developed along this River area was the ivory trade. The Connecticut River, one of the things that it offered the early colonists was a lot of good timber. And this became a shipbuilding center as well in the 1700s. One of the more better known shipbuilding companies was the Eli and Thomas Denison Shipbuilding Company. And several of their ships that were built there. I hear a duck quacking. Oh, it's a phone. That's funny. I'm looking around. Yeah. Oh, folks, over there, if you look off to the right, there's a great white egret over there waiting. They're typical wading birds. Little known fact,
What are they waiting for?
the great white egret is the symbol of the Audubon Society. At one point, the great egret was almost went extinct because their white feathers were very much prized for women's hats. So much so that the birds were disappearing. But fortunately, the Audubon Society stepped in and educated people about that, and today they're very numerous. Not extinct at all, nowhere near. So I was saying, these ships that they built here, some of them sailed all the way to Africa, and they came back with ivory. They came back with elephant tusks that was processed into different ivory artifacts. And the reason that that ivory was imported to this part of the world is because there was a fellow by the name of Isaiah Pratt, and he invented a machine that could cut ivory. That machine and further developments mechanized the ivory industry, and it became centered in this little area.
They'll tell you that didn't look like a castle at all, but it's an American version of a castle. You're probably wondering, what's a castle doing over here? We don't have kings or queens. That castle is Gillette Castle. And who was William Gillette? William Gillette, the builder of that castle, was a very famous actor. And he's most famous for portraying Sherlock Holmes. Now, when I say portraying, that's kind of an understatement because he actually developed all the nuances that we associate with Sherlock Holmes today, such as the deerskin cap, the curved pipe, the magnifying glass, the cloak, even the expression "elementary, my dear fellow." These were all little nuances that William Gillette brought to the character. Now, it's kind of funny. It said that line, "elementary, my dear fellow," came about once when when William was portraying Sherlock Holmes, and he had been asked how he solved a particular mystery or murder, and William Gillette sort of went blank for a minute and couldn't remember his lines, and so he came up with "elementary, my dear fellow," and within that time span, then he remembered his correct lines. Interestingly enough, that stuck, and as I say, it's one of those things we associate with Sherlock Holmes today. Now, William went on to portray Sherlock Holmes more than 1,300 times, not just on the U.S. stage, but also over in Europe. It was in England and in continental Europe that he came across these castles. And once he acquired a little bit of wealth, of his success and wealth, he decided to build one for himself. William, as I mentioned, he portrayed Sherlock Holmes more than 1,300 times. He was also a producer, a playwright. He had patented many theatrical tricks. So he did acquire quite a fortune over the years. And it said, he bought this property in 1914, and it is said that it took 20 men 5 years at a cost of $1 million to build the castle. And William oversaw every aspect of the construction. Now, folks, that was $1 million in 1914 money. That would be equivalent to about $25 million today. So that just shows you how very successful William was.
So folks on the port side, you'll have to wait till we're heading south, and then you'll get the first the better seats for the eagle viewing. But maybe not. Further up ahead, there are eagles on that side. Yeah, well, we frequently spot them on that side.
Oh, I see it. See the white spot. Yeah, that's what I thought. See the